My brothers and sisters in Christ, God bless. May Christ protect us and guide us and keep us, and may we keep the Torah and the Gospels to the fullest extent of our abilities, and may we return to the biblical theocracy as Christ intended for us. May the kingdom of Israel rise again. I'm going to be going over some free energy devices today. So this is called an earth battery. This is a zinc rod connected to a copper pipe, and essentially each one of these is a half a cell battery. And this is what they used for the telegraph, right? Where they're pushing the button and it was making a little beeping noise. Well, it was carrying electricity through telluric currents. Essentially, there's electricity that flows through the earth, and you can harvest this electricity in very small quantities for certain properties. So here we can see that we have 1 through 12 volts direct current array. Okay, let's continue. So here you can see another example of the earth battery. We have some galvanized nails connected to some copper wire. This guy pulls about 5 volts. So you want to add water to the dirt to get better conductivity. So have you ever seen those copper coils that they stick into the ground? They say it's like electroculture, where they say the electricity flows into the copper, into the ground, and makes the plants grow better. Well, there might be something to that, especially when the ground gets wet. So here you can see another example. Soil plus water equals battery. This is a mud battery. And yes, it will produce very small quantities of electricity. Is it practical? For certain aspects. For telegraph it was. Telegram, whichever one it is. Telegraphy. Is that it? Telegraphy? So this is a Baghdad battery. I don't actually think this is a battery. I think this is a capacitor. So what it is, it's a copper tube with an iron nail inside of it, and then it's sealed with pitch, which is like oil, like tar. So what this could be is a device that you can store electricity inside of, whether the electricity comes from the ground, because remember, a copper tube around an iron nail is very similar to an electromagnet. So perhaps they stuck this thing into the ground and it harvested the electricity that way, or perhaps there was a distribution of electricity through the air using like the pyramids or the Tesla Tower or something, but there's something to this. See, this doesn't seem to be how it worked, because how would you get the liquid inside of it if it's covered with tar? What you would have to do is you'd have to find another way to store electricity in this. Ceramic is used in capacitors. It's very possible that this was used as not a battery, but as a capacitor, which can store even larger quantities of electricity. So the copper and the iron nail, in this case, would function as an electromagnet, and the static electricity would build up inside of this capacitor, and then who knows what they would use it for. Here's another example of what it looks like, cut in half. As you can see, the iron nail is stuck in there with this pitch. You're not going to get any liquid inside of it. This is not a battery. You cannot store an electrolyte inside of it. It has to be used for something else. A capacitor makes a lot more sense. So this is from the Assassin's Creed Egypt game. I think it's called Origins or Odyssey. So this is what the pyramids used to look like when they were perfect. We don't really know much about the pyramids, just that they looked very different before. And they have a lot of secret chambers, and there's water flowing underneath it. And these white stones that were on top of it made it very, very reflectant. This thing was built by people who were far greater than possibly even modern humans. I believe this thing was some sort of free energy device similar to what Nikola Tesla was working on. I believe that these things were capable of transmitting electricity through that golden pyramid capstone, or as a means of harvesting energy, or perhaps both. So this is Nikola Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower. I believe this was in Colorado. When J.P. Morgan realized that this thing would be able to produce electricity without having a meter on it, and that the electricity would be free, he immediately discontinued the funding. Nikola Tesla did not invent free electricity. Okay, this is something that he was working on that had already existed for about almost a century before him. So this is a crystal radio. These are very interesting toys. You can essentially harvest radio waves and use it for the electricity to listen to the radio. These devices do not use a battery, they do not plug into a wall, they do not use any form of electricity except for the electricity from the radio waves. So, what is it? It is a copper coil of magnetized wire. It is a capacitor, a diode, a connection to the ground, an earpiece. It's a few simple pieces of electricity, of electronics. And you can essentially make this from scraps. And that is exactly what they did during World War II and during the Vietnam War. They made these things called foxhole radios, which were essentially the exact same thing, just not quite as good. These crystal radios were the first radio devices. You didn't plug it into a wall. The electricity was free. Here's an example of a foxhole radio. You can see it's got a piece of, in the top right corner, you see like a razor blade. So they would oxidize the razor blade to be able to use it to listen to. Because that would be the diode. That would be I think it was iron oxide would act as a crystal, as a diode. So you'd be able to transmit from alternating current to direct current through that diode. But once again, the first radios did not require electricity. Energy is free. The higher up you go, the more electricity you're going to be able to harvest. This is a design for a Rectenna, and I actually built one of these before. I didn't do it quite as it says here, but I did manage to get a few volts, not few volts, but I managed to get a few millivolts of electricity. The higher your antenna goes up, the more electricity you're going to be able to harvest from this thing. So let's start with the top left. You got an antenna there. Once again, the higher the antenna goes up, the more electricity you get. Tie it to a hydrogen balloon, tie it to a helium balloon, tie it to a drone, tie it to like a piece of PVC pipe and stick that thing up like 100 feet in the air, whatever. But the higher the antenna goes, the more electricity you're going to be able to harvest. The ether is full of electricity. Now you have two capacitors, and these are both alternating current capacitors, I believe. C1 and C2 are 0.22 UF 100 volt ceramic or polyester capacitors. Okay, so the two capacitors will store the electricity like a battery. Then you have 4 of these diodes. That's what the triangles with the lines are. The diodes are going to convert the alternating current electricity from the capacitors into direct current electricity. Then you have 2 direct current capacitors, C3 and C4, and this is what's going to split it from alternating current to direct current, which you can use. Then you have the positive and you have the negative. This could be possibly combined with an earth battery or with something similar to that to be able to harvest even more electricity, or perhaps to connect it directly into water with an electrolyte, and now you can split the water into hydrogen and oxygen, which is what I believe this man was working on. There's a patent called U.S. Patent 28793, Improved Method of Using Atmospheric Electricity from June 1860 by, I believe his name was Vion Hippolyte. Now this man actually managed to create essentially what I'm talking about. He created a means for harvesting electricity from the air and from the earth to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and he used this to fill up a balloon, which would raise the antenna even higher, where he would harvest even more electricity. In the 1800s, he did this. And he envisioned a world where we would no longer need petroleum or coal to power our machinery. Unfortunately, he did not take into consideration that the world is run by Satanists, and the only way to remove the curse that they put on us is to strictly obey the Torah and the Gospels, so God will smile favorably upon us and will essentially give us an easier path. But if we're not going to obey him, he's not going to protect us. But yes, this is a device where you use copper wires, and you use these to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and it's not very complicated. I think that's my last picture. So positive will make oxygen, and negative will make hydrogen. So if you were to make one of these things and you wanted to use it to split water, what you would need is stainless steel for the positive and negative at the end, and you would need distilled water, or I suppose any type of water should work, but ideally you want distilled, and sodium hydroxide, or lye. Sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide is probably best. And about 30% of the weight of the solution should be lye. So 30 grams of lye, of sodium hydroxide if we're going to be specific, because lye is also mixed with other things. 30 grams of sodium hydroxide and 70 milliliters of water. 70 grams of water, milliliters, it's the same thing. The water would absorb the electrolyte, it would get hot, you'd have to stir it often, and the positive would make oxygen, the negative would make hydrogen, and you could essentially harvest electricity right out of the air using this sort of device. There would be a risk of lightning. Don't think it's going to be safe. If you touch the wires, you could electrocute yourself, you could die. And you could also cause an electric, thunderstorm kind of situation where you get struck by lightning for being too close to this thing. But it's interesting to note that this technology exists, that it's real, and that we can have this if we're willing to obey God. Why is it that every time somebody finds a cure for cancer or finds a way to make a car run on water or something revolutionary like that could make the world a better place, why is it that they always die? Because we are under a curse. And the curse is mentioned in the Bible. We are cursed for disobeying the Torah. We are cursed for disobeying Christ. If we had a biblical theocracy, these things would be practical and we would be allowed to have them. But we do not have a biblical theocracy, so if anybody tries this, we are essentially under the devil's jurisdiction, and the devil will have us killed by the CIA, the Men in Black, the FBI, the NSA. You name it, they will come. So what's important is that we return to the Bible, and then we have the foundation to build on these technologies. Otherwise, it's not going to get us anywhere except for a bullet. All right. God bless.